4K gaming is incredible. Everybody wants to do it, but you might have heard that you need an RTX 5090 to get it done. And is that true? Or could you buy something like the RTX 5080 and still play all your games at excellent frame rates at 4K? Well, in my review that I did on the 5080, it certainly held up well, but there were a number of titles where, especially at native 4K, but even with using DLSS, it didn't quite reach in the, say, hundreds of frames that many gamers were aiming for. And so today we're going to dive into games and figure out just how much do you have to compromise to reach the frame rates that you desire with an RTX 5080 at 4K. Before that, this video is brought to you by Jawa. Jawa's mission is to be the community for safely buying and selling PC parts at a reasonable price, offering low fees and great customer service, which I can definitely attest to, as I personally bought this RTX 3070 from Jawa anonymously, and not only did it arrive quickly, but when I ran into an issue, they immediately replaced it with a flawless substitute and asked that I only send the old one back after I confirmed the new GPU worked great. And the best part is the price I got this card at was well below other listings I could find anywhere else, likely thanks in part to Jawa's much lower seller fees of 9 to 12% depending on when you join. So if you're interested in buying or selling PC parts on a platform with low fees and great customer service, be sure to click the link in the description below and watch out for some of my hardware that'll likely be popping up very soon. And the first game I'm going to start off with is actually Oblivion. And all the games I'm going to be playing today are games that I'm currently playing and enjoying, but also ones that are very difficult to run. And this one is certainly very difficult to run. As you can see here, I'm playing the game absolutely maxed out at 4K, and we're getting 46 frames per second in the city. And to many of you out there, 46 frames per second, well, that might be considered unplayable. And for me, that definitely would be the case. Now, don't get me wrong, you can definitely play the game, but it's just not as smooth as I'd like. It's very juddery in motion. And personally, what I'm going to try and aim for in single player games is a minimum of 90 frames per second. And in multiplayer games, an absolute minimum of 144, but ideally 165 or higher. Can we get that done? Well, it looks like at least at native 4K, this is definitely not going to happen. So let's dive into the settings here real quick. And first, let's turn on DLSS. We're definitely going to need that one. So let's go here, DLSS, there it is. And I'm going to go ahead and start off with DLSS balance. Now, this is a great way to upscale because you're getting close to a 1440p input, but a 4K output. And what you might notice if you look closely is that some of the edges of stuff is slightly going to be softened versus native 4K, but to be honest with you, I often think that balanced DLSS looks as good, if not better, than native 4K depending on the game. Of course, that's subjective. It has its positives and negatives, but we have jumped all the way up to 76 frames per second, and I would definitely consider this playable at this point, but it's not the ideal frame rate that we're shooting for. And let's go ahead and jump it down now to performance. And what you're going to notice when you jump down to performance DLSS is that unfortunately you are going to get, I'd say at this point, a noticeable decrease in the overall image quality versus native 4K, but it's not too bad. It's actually pretty close still in my opinion, and now we've jumped up to over 80 frames per second. Now, we could go into other areas and probably get higher frame rates, but I'm going to stick around the city right now because this is definitely a really tough area to run, but we're still not quite reaching that locked 90 frames per second. We're getting up there, but it's not all the time. So let's go ahead and jump into those settings. And now I'm going to actually use frame generation. Yes, I know many people might not want to use frame generation, and trust me, I get it. It is going to increase the latency, but what I've found is with the use of Reflex, and especially when Reflex 2 comes in not too long, because that's going to make it even faster, there's often, at least if I can get 80 frames per second, I find the experience is still pretty good in single player games, and I have started using 2x frame generation. Now, yes, the 50 series has 3 and 4x, but I find that the latency is just a little too high for those. And what we can see here now is that I'm now getting over 130 frames per second in this area. Not only is the latency feeling pretty good, but it's also actually looking really good in motion too. All right, now I'm in the open world, and as you can see, it is a bit harder to run. So I thought actually the city would be harder. Looks like that's not the case. Looks like all this greenery is making it quite a bit harder to run, but yet we are still exceeding 90 frames per second. And what that means is the latency is still feeling pretty good. It looks pretty good in motion. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Yes, the RTX 5080 is good enough to play Oblivion Remastered fully maxed out, including ray tracing, and you're gonna get a great experience in this game. But what about another game? Let's go ahead and take a look at the finals. All right, so we're here in the finals, and this is definitely a game I play a lot, and it looks like at native 4K, using absolute max settings, we're not gonna hit that 144 or 165 hertz that I wanna hit, and you're gonna need to hit it in this game. It is highly, highly competitive. Can I play it at 80? Yes, but I'm at a big disadvantage. So let's go ahead and see if we can get that frame rate up. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn off RTX Global Illumination. And in fact, that wasn't even on Epic. So on Epic, my performance is even slightly worse. But in any case, let's turn that off. And now you can see the frame rate has jumped up a bit, but I mean, we're still talking close to 90 FPS. This is nowhere near the roughly 165 I'd like to hit in this game to be hyper competitive against other players. In fact, some people play this game at like 360 hertz. So yeah, we're definitely gonna need to get that frame rate up. Let's now go ahead and turn on DLSS. I think we're gonna need it for this game. So let's start off with DLSS balanced once again, close to 1440p input, 4K output. And we're now talking about around 120 frames per second. Could I play this game online at 120 FPS? Again, yes, I could, but it's feeling a little bit sluggish right there. I was having a bit of trouble tracking people. We need to get that frame rate up. Let's go ahead and now turn it up to, I would say, performance DLSS and see what we can get here. Okay, we're at performance DLSS, and now I'm getting between, say, 120 to 140 FPS, but it really hasn't changed a whole lot, which tells me I am gonna need to reduce settings if I wanna play this game at 4K without frame generation, because I'd prefer not to, especially on an online game, especially with a card this expensive. So this is not cutting it for me still. Let's now go ahead and start using competitive settings. So typically what I would do is probably keep anti-aliasing on low, view distance epic, shadows. Yeah, we could probably do medium on shadows, post-processing, medium, textures epic, effects. We can probably do medium, reflections, low, foliage low, and then global illumination resolution low. And let's see what we're getting here. All right, so now we're up at actually around 180 FPS. 160. So it looks like we actually are getting, you know, competitive settings or 4K using DLSS performance. We are in and about that 165 that we want to be at. And in fact, if I go ahead and actually lock the frame rate here, which I'm going to do, let's go to the settings and lock it to, let's say 160. See if we can lock that in. We may actually be able to lock 160 and reduce our latency even further, as when we're not GPU bound, the latency is gonna go down quite a bit. All right, so I got 160 FPS locked and it's holding pretty steady. I mean, it's not perfect, it drops here and there, so I'd say this is pretty good. Yeah, you could drop some settings here and there to get a higher frame rate in this game. In fact, let me go ahead and actually reduce some stuff even further to see how high of a frame rate we can really get. All right, now I'm using DLSS Ultra Performance and I'm locking 175 hertz. Maybe I could even go a little bit higher. Let's see, about 180. See if we can get that. Okay, 180 hertz, 180 frames per second. It's pretty solid. Little tiny drops here and there, but 180 frames per second. And thanks to the new Nvidia Transformer DLSS, I would say Ultra Performance DLSS in the new Transformer model in this game looks somewhere between 1440p and 4K if you're using some sort of, you know, TAA or DLSS, something like that, with some, you know, slight motion imperfections. And I wanted to real quick add that yes, this game does support frame generation as well. Normally I would definitely not use it in an online game. However, it may be an option in the near future, as this is a game that is explicitly going to be getting Reflex 2, a technology that when I had hands-on time with it at CES, I did see evidence of it reducing latency by as much as 10 milliseconds. Well, in a lot of cases, frame generation has an input delay of an additional 10 milliseconds. So you could, in theory, depending on how it works out, use frame generation and get 240 frames per second at 4K using upscaling, of course. But yes, the 5080 is definitely capable of playing this game at 4K at high frame rates. All right, the last game we're taking a look at, and one that I definitely love, is Cyberpunk 2077. And if you can't notice, it's running at 16 to 19 frames per second. It's not great, but this is of course running at native 4K using path tracing. I mean, this is ridiculous. Nobody would ever run it like this. No frame generation, nothing. This is about as raw as it's gonna get. And trust me, yeah, it doesn't feel great. So let's go into the settings and see if we can get this playable, because as I mentioned mentioned earlier, I want 165 Hz or higher in online games if I can with expensive graphics cards, but for these types of games, 90 FPS, if we can hit that, let's do it. So actually, oh my lord, it was using frame generation. What did it look like without frame generation? Okay, it looks like, no, it wasn't using frame generation because we're getting the same frame rate. Okay, anyway, back to the settings, and here we can see we got everything on path tracing, and we're gonna use the new transformer model because once again, this is gonna be much better than the convolutional upscaling, has a lot more data, and it's gonna look sharper. So we're gonna use that, and I'm gonna go ahead and try balanced preset right off the bat. And let's see what type of frame rate we're getting now. And it looks like we're getting around 40 frames per second. I mean, look, it's still not great, but is this playable? I would say yes. Now, would I want to play it at 40 frames per second? No. So let's go ahead and adjust some settings, see what we can get done here. So performance DLSS, let's see what we got. All right, now we're up to around 50 frames per second, and the magic number is gonna be close to 80 frames per second, because if we can get close to 80 and then double it with frame generation, if we need to use it, you're gonna get really high image quality and still get pretty decent latency. Whereas right now, 50, it's still a bit lower than I'd like. So let's see what we can do. Now we're in a bit of a pinch because we can either start reducing settings or we can start, going lower in DLSS. Now, personally, even though we could do, ultra performance DLSS, I wouldn't want to in this game. So let's try and reduce some settings. All right, look, if you want to play with path tracing in this game, you're gonna have to use frame generation. So let's just take a look at what 2x frame generation looks like right now. Yes, you can use 3x and 4x. Personally, I don't like them. I think that right now the latency is too high, and okay, it's not even working. Let me relaunch the game. All right, I've opened the game back up. I got frame generation 2x working, and as you can see, we're getting, close to 100 frames per second. And honestly, yes, this is now playable. And would I play the game like this? If I wanted the highest graphics possible, yeah, I think this is totally fine. It's a little bit more sluggish than I'd like, but it's definitely doable. Now, we do have 3x and 4x frame generation. I don't love those as they're even higher latency, but as you can see with 3x, now we're, 130, 140 frames per second. It looks great in motion, but yes, the latency's gone up just a bit. Feels a bit more sluggish. And then of course, frame generation 4x is gonna be even worse in terms of latency. This, I honestly don't like it at this point now, even though we're getting, nearly 160, 170 frames per second. It looks absolutely incredible in motion, but it just doesn't feel that great. So let's stick with 2x. And let's say you're someone who wants a little bit more of a snappy experience. Well, you're gonna have to reduce some settings. And the first thing you're gonna have to do is just knock off path tracing. Now with the regular ray tracing, here you can see 2x frame generation, you're getting 130, 140 FPS. And I think this is a great balance. This is a great way to play the game and definitely makes it very playable. The latency's good, the motion's good, and the graphics are also good. But if you want something that's even more snappy, well, you can just go ahead and turn off ray tracing entirely. And if you do that with 2x frame generation, now you're getting 170 frames per second, and boy, does this look and feel good. But you could get even more responsive and you could turn off frame generation with no ray tracing. And here you got, well, you're still getting over 100 frames per second. It looks a little bit less smooth, but it feels incredibly snappy. So is the 5080 good enough to play this game at 4K? Absolutely. And in fact, I think we've proven with all three games that it's good enough to play any game at 4K at really high settings with decent latency and excellent motion performance. And for that reason, I feel like, yes, the 5080, it's good enough, and I could definitely recommend picking one up with a 4K 240 Hz OLED panel. In fact, if you want to do so, I'll have some affiliate links in the description below. But if you don't, that's totally fine. If you're just curious about whether or not the 5080 is good enough for 4K gaming, I think the answer that we've proven in this video, at least in my opinion, yes, it is. Now, is it a 100% ultra settings native 4K experience in every game? No, but I feel like the compromise you have to make on a 5080 are very minor, and overall, I think it's a great experience, and this card is definitely good enough to play all your games at 4K at good quality settings.
If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, AMD and Nvidia release new GPUs. Also, if you want to see more, check out one of these related videos. You won't be disappointed.